you got to pick a pocket or two. You got to pick a pocket or two, boy.
You got to pick a pocket or two.
Gotta pick a pocket or two.
Let's show a little how to do it, my dears.
Marshall McLuhan reciting Ezra Pound claims poets are the antenna of the race, and as radar acts as an early warning system enabling us to discover social and political targets in time to cope with them. Thus it is the poets that have the utmost relevance not only to communication and media study, but to the development of media controls. McLuhan writes of using avant-garde poetics to organize the data of the historian and the social scientist, recognizing the value of rereading records and statistics through cultural forms. 50 years later, conceptual poetry arrives and operates by obsessively archiving and cataloging cultural spam, not creating, but managing information. According to Kittler, the new sciences and technologies made it necessary for poets to renounce the imagination. Conceptual poetry, self-described as uncreative writing, uses word processing, databasing, sampling, coding, cutting, pasting, and mashing up unloved language, debased language, focusing more on the initial concept than the final product. Just as the telegraph turned words into a commodity, Rob Fetterman's pop-up word shop selling language creates an information economy, highlighting how language is both material object and active transference, media, message, content, and container in an endless remarketability of production, consumption, transcription, and transaction. Like how Pound saw literature as news that stays news, imparting crucial information about meaning-making as it circulates through culture, McLuhan saw the newspaper as a mosaic where the dateline replaced the storyline, an intertextual matrix of extracted, maculate, bracketed track-sack fractures where you can read it in any order you want. Throughout history, conceptual poets have used the newspaper as source material for their investigations into differing models of communication. Marinetti, Mallarmé, the Italian Futurists, Wyndham Lewis, Picasso, and the Cubists, Sarah, Schwitters, Geisen, Burroughs, all beaten, bruised, blasted, and cut up, resourcing systems of semiotic slippage. A recent manifestation of this is Goldsmith's Day, a word-for-word transcription of the entire New York Times newspaper for September 1st, 2000, making no distinction between article, editorial, or ad, disregarding all typographical treatment. Day not only questions the hierarchy of information, but foregrounds the diversity of communication models comprised of yesterday's news. This sense of recreating the past through mimicry and transcription inevitably results in a reevaluation of history. For Zizek, to build a future, you have to ransack the past. McLuhan's rearview window. Benjamin's angel of history ceaselessly walks into the future where contents regenerate in an autopoietic past of a past of repassed postulates.
'Cause if you like it, then you should have put a frame on it. If you like it, then you should have put a frame on it. You'll be glad once you co-opted it. If you like it, then you should have put a frame on it.
Conceptual poetry as a hybridized medium not only reframes history but law, biology, and digital technologies. Taking Burroughs' Language as a Virus literally, Christian Book's Xenotext experiment implants bacteria into DNA and shoots it into space, attempting to engineer a life form so that it will not only store a poem but becomes a writing machine. Not only is conceptual poetry questioning genre, but the hierarchic domains of discourse, urging us to look at the poetic qualities of the excluded languages of the everyday, the internet, the street, graffiti, radio broadcast, news reports. Goldsmith recently read at the White House. Filmed live and globally broadcast, he read a listing of traffic reports from 1010 Winds as poetry.
Traffic at the 59th Street Bridge, which is jammed coming into Manhattan. Right now, you've also got jam-ups on the Brooklyn Bridge, bumper to Brooklyn, but the lower roadway is wide open. The Brooklyn Bridge is swamped. The FDR Drive's not looking good either, bumper to bumper right off the Manhattan Bridge. Meanwhile, the West Side Tunnel delays begin in the 70s, and they go all the way south down to the Battery Tunnel.
In the diction of the ordinary and everyday, traffic then becomes a kind of probe, a web of disparate ideas altering perception, working associatively, full of rapture, scripture as apertures, operating as an aphoristic machine of punning and metonymy, of auxiliary lanes and interchanges, weaves, yields, swerves out from its own gridlock. Further investigations into decemic ecologies are ever present with conceptual poetry's cousin Flarf, whose mandate is to create poems out of Google search results, whether reworking Shakespearean sonnets into Rogaine bunnies, Pokemon peanuts, or peppermint jihad. Within the anonymized algorithms of reshoveled junk speech, poems become a virtual chat room. Canadian conceptual poets Bissett and Beaulieu also offer probing investigations into meaning production as an interlingual ecosystem, enacting what Guattari might call a transversal practice of surfaces, with a-signifying semiological dimensions that establish figural narratives with a figure refigured in a continually shifting ground. Not only calling attention to the materiality of language, but the process of reading is the focus of Craig Dworkin's Parse. A translation of Abbott's 1874 guide, How to Parse, sentences are converted into descriptions of their own grammatical structure. In Parse plays Purse with replaced plosives, Parse parasitically performs and exposes language's impossible transparency. Thus, for conceptual poets, the poem is not just a repository of information, but reframing, repurposing, it's recreating not so much in the age of mechanical reproducibility, but in the age of mimetic proliferation, exposing itself as units, a cultural knowledge virally replicating itself, and thus doing with language what language has always done for itself, resembling something it is not. As a container of kinships, contours, recognition, kinesis, conceptual poetry reminds us how in the age of digital media, as language is poured into AdStock's database, morphed, animated, spammed, and spit out, it is the environment for developing new methodological tools for investigating the material and circulatory aspects of communication.
Everybody, yes!